Hello and welcome again to Academia Oscura. In today's video we'll be discussing folktale, fiction, and saga in the Homeric epics by Rhys Carpenter, which was taken from a lecture he gave at the University of California in Berkeley in 1962. In this lecture, Rhys Carpenter delves into the origins and symbolic meanings behind the tale of the Odyssey. Many of us are familiar with the story, of course, of Odysseus, unable to get home after the Trojan War, and spending years traveling around the Mediterranean, stopping in various places, being held up by monsters or gods or Circe and various female witchy people who entrance him or his sailors, and little by little his sailors are slowly killed off so that finally, in the end, it's just Odysseus and he manages to get back home through great hardship. Rhys Carpenter was quite an interesting classical scholar. He was born in the 1890s, he died in 1980. He was the director of the American Institute of Classical Studies in Athens for many years in the 1930s, and a professor at Bryn Mawr College for a lot of his career. He's notable in that he interpreted classical Greek society from a very anthropological perspective and mythology from the perspective of folklorical studies, which viewed Greek mythology as a part and parcel of European prehistoric mythological motifs that are recurring throughout history. So in his lecture that we're now discussing, he compares the story of Odysseus to a prehistoric myth cycle which was identified by the German folklorist Panzer. And this mythological cycle revolves around a bear cult, which is quite primitive and can be traced back to prehistoric times, Neolithic times. Panzer was able to identify this same mythological story in many different cultures across Northern Europe into Siberia and even Asia as a sort of recurring theme. And it revolves around a hero who has to defeat a monster, or in the case of the Odyssey, numerous monsters, and ultimately defeats them and in the process visits the underworld, or in some way communicates with the chthonic underworld spirits. And this can be seen in the Odyssey, with the journey that Odysseus makes to Hades and the offerings which he made in Hades to the spirits of his ancestors and of his deceased sailors. And according to Rhys Carpenter, the difference between the primordial primitive myth and the Odyssey is that in the primordial myth there was just one monster, usually a bear, who is attacking people living in a cave, and this cave bear is defeated or sacrificed by the hero. In the case of the Odyssey, we see reflections of this ancient story in the tale of Polyphemus the Cyclops, who is a giant monster living in a cave, and who traps Odysseus and his sailors, and then is tricked or defeated by Odysseus so that they're able to escape According to Rhys Carpenter's interpretation, this and many of the other stories in the Odyssey about Odysseus escaping wily monsters or witches are repetitive retellings of this primordial tale of the hero who defeats a great bear who lives in a cave. He also compares this story to a much later myth from the Anglo-Saxons, that of Beowulf, which is also similarly about a hero who defeats a monster who lives in some subterranean cave world. Now you might ask yourself, why is Rhys Carpenter explaining this myth in this way? Many people believe, and have believed for a long time, that the Odyssey and the Iliad are some sort of folk memory of actual historical events. Rhys Carpenter denies this fact, and he goes at great lengths in the beginning portion of his lecture to explain that there is actually zero archaeological evidence that the Trojan War or the city of Troy ever actually existed. He goes on to denounce the explorations of Heinrich Schliemann, who claimed to have found the ruins of Troy in Asia Minor, and basically critiques the archaeological discovery as complete fiction, saying that Schliemann simply found ruins of a city and then decided that this city was supposedly Troy, without any actual archaeological evidence that it was, just based upon it being located in vaguely the same area as Troy was said to have been located. In fact, he goes on to break down the archaeology of Troy and show that the city uncovered by Schliemann literally shows no similarities whatsoever to the city that's described in the Iliad and the Odyssey, and that in fact, if this city was to be Troy, there wouldn't actually be any location where the battles could have taken place that are described in the Iliad, and the sea is too far away. There would have been no way for them to travel those great distances. Basically, in a nutshell, he implodes Schliemann's claim that the ruins he excavated off the Hellespont are actually the mythical city of Troy. So, based upon Carpenter's rejection that the city of Troy really existed, or that the Trojan War really existed, or ever happened, or that anyone like Odysseus ever existed, he is basically seeing the legend of Odysseus as a purely mythological tale with links to and roots in primitive Northern European culture that have nothing to do with any historical event that supposedly happened. Carpenter argues further that the Iliad and Odyssey were, of course, great poems that supposedly were based on heroic acts of historical heroes, but he goes on to say that these tales of heroic actions in both poems are in fact just retellings of long existent mythological cycles, and that the notion that they're based on any historical events is a later addition or reinterpretation. and based on absolutely no evidence. So I hope you've enjoyed today's video. If you have, please remember to like and subscribe. And in my next video, I will discuss some more about the folkloric and anthropological approach to ancient Greek and Roman culture and mythology. Please join us again next time for Academia Oscura.